how important voting is, especially in this election. And, not to sound dramatic, but like our democracy is on the ballot this election. So, and with COVID as this additional hurdle, it's really important not just to register, but to create a plan. How are you going to vote, in person, by mail? I just want to make sure everyone knows that they need to be prepared and just have a plan. But we do have an amazing panel here today. So I want to first just thank you all for being with us and the work that you do. I personally worked on 2 voting rights task forces this summer. And so I know this is not slight work. It is a lot. So thank you again for all that you're doing. And just in terms of logistics and how this is going to flow, we have a preset list of questions that I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to reserve the last 20 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, just feel free to post it in the chat. And again, in the last 20 minutes, I'll try to go as many as I can. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll start with Mitchell Brown. Mitchell graduated from the New York University School of Law in May 2017, where he served as the chair of the Black Allied Law Students Association. After graduating from law school, Mitchell clerked for the Honorable J. Michelle Childs on the United States District Court for the District of South Carolina and for the Honorable Chief Judge Carly Stewart on the United States District Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He believes that he has been called to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the defenseless, and empower those who feel powerless. Next, we have Jonathan Mehta Stein, who is a civil rights attorney and longtime democracy reform advocate. Jonathan Mehta Stein is the executive director of California Common Cause. Jonathan spent 4 years as the head of the Voting Rights and Census Program at Asian Law Caucus, where he worked to increase access to California's democracy for historically disenfranchised communities. Jonathan previously worked as a voting rights staff attorney for the ACLU of California and was the chair of the Oakland Public Ethics Commission. He is originally from the South Bay. Next, we have our very own Adena. Adena sits on the BLSA board with me, and she is the Voter Services Director of the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville. From 2017 to 2019, she was elected as the youngest and first woman of color to serve as president of the BAE League. Adena is also in the League of Women Voters California State Equity Task Force. And I don't see Dr. Turner yet, but I will introduce her in case she shows up a little bit later. Dr. Deborah Turner has served on the League of Women Voters U.S. National Board since 2016. She served as the vice president of the League of Women Voters Iowa from 2011 to 2015, and as president of the League of Women Voters Des Moines Metropolitan from 2010 to 2015. She obtained her JD from Drake University and her MD from the University of Iowa. She's been a gynecologic oncologist for 30 years. She was elected board president at the 54th National Convention of the League of Women Voters in June 2020, and will serve in this position until June 2022. She currently lives in Nebraska and has 2 adult children, a son and a niece. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you our panelists for being here today. So we're just gonna jump right in with the first question, and I'll just go down the line in the order that I introduced you in terms of answering it. So the first question, for attendees learning about this subject for the first time, what is voter suppression? So Mitchell, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So to answer your question, voter suppression it's very wide. There are many things that can be defined as voter suppression, but the way I define it is the silencing of voices. So whether those are the voices of Black and Brown communities, whether those are the voices of poor folks or folks that are underserved, that's what I call voter suppression. And it looks in the way of silencing people, where they're not able to express their voice through the voting process. Voting and the vote is political currency for elected officials. And, if their vote is suppressed, it means that they don't have a say in how they're governed. And if you don't have a say in how you're governed, then the policies and the laws that your legislator makes or your elected official make, may affect you in a negative way, and you aren't fully represented. In DC, there's no taxation without representation. Voter suppression means that you can govern how you want to, but I have no say because my voice doesn't matter to you. So that's how I would define voter suppression.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I co-sign that 100%. Thank you, Mitchell, for that. I'll say in the voting rights history, that we thought we were making progress because we had moved from an era of what's called vote denial, leading up to and shortly after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. The challenges of voter suppression were literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, overt, open, sometimes violent discrimination in voting. And over time, because the Voting Rights Act was very successful, we moved into a period that legal experts and historians will refer to as vote dilution. Instead of finding ways to outright deny the right to vote, instead, the forces that don't want to see all communities represented and making their voices heard move to finding ways to dilute the vote. So you use election systems, for example, that despite the fact that people are voting, they're not able to actually achieve representation, right? We live today, though, in a period in which I think we're fighting a new form of vote denial and vote dilution at the same time. We have voter ID laws, we have voter purging laws, we have polling place closures that disproportionately impact Black communities or other communities of color. We don't have the protections of at least most of the Voting Rights Act following the Shelby County decision in 2013. And as a result, I think communities of color today are having as hard a time voting as any time since 1965. And I think that the reality is that the, let's say the rhetoric coming out of the White House undermines trust in the voting process. And we can get into the details of that later, but it undermines the credibility of voting and makes people question whether their votes will count. And that is its own form of vote suppression.
Yes, very true. Adena, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to be speaking tonight from my perspective on a very local level. As Janae mentioned earlier, I'm focused on the Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville area, even though I go to school at Santa Clara. I know we're all online right now anyway. So I will say that something that I think about when I think about voter suppression is also folks who can't access the ballot as easy because they have a disability, or they speak another language, and just a lot of that information. It's not just about actually accessing voter registration and voting. It's also about the information that you need to get to make an informed choice, and that if that information is not available in different languages, then we're not able to reach folks. I also think about the fact that yes, we're talking about voter suppression, but I also want to talk a little bit today about expanding voting rights, like for instance, making sure that folks who are on parole, felons on parole, will be able to vote. That's something that's going to be on the ballot this year. And in San Francisco, 16, 17-year-olds will be able to vote for municipal elections if I think it's Measure G actually passes this year. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. It's something that I support a lot. In Berkeley, 16 and 17-year-olds were supposed to be able to vote for school board, but they still haven't actually gone through the process of making that happen. So just some things to think about.
Yeah, we will definitely get into the expanding side of this, but just to get more specific in terms of what the times that we are living in now. So what does voter suppression look like in this new age of technology and social media, and how is that impacting voters? Anyone now can jump in.
I'll jump in first. When I was thinking about this question, I thought about misinformation. I think that is one of the biggest forms of voter suppression now is misinformation. You look at the 2016 election and the Russian hackers, drawing lines of dissent between communities. Communities that are supposed to, have a common interest, a common goal, whether it's Russian hackers or parties, I have to be nonpartisan, but parties, drawing lines of dissent through communities, is misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation coming out of the White House. There's a lot of misinformation, coming out of the State House about, what a certain law may mean, or just the act of voting, like specifically voting by mail. So California's vote by mail in some capacity, but in North Carolina, we're not voting. Like a lot of people are voting by mail. Pandemic now, but they listen to information from the State House or the White House, and they're scared to vote now. They think their vote is going to be stolen, or they think that others think that the more people that vote by mail, the more voter fraud there is, which is just not true. So I think that's the big in this era of technology and media is misinformation by far.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I want to echo Mitchell. I mean, because of the pandemic, millions and millions of people who have typically voted in person are now instead going to vote by mail because they want to vote safely from their homes. So California is going to make sure that every single registered voter gets a vote by mail ballot, whether they requested it or not. It's one of a small handful of states that is taking that very proactive step. And yet, we found in focus groups that we held with the Center for Social Innovation at UC Riverside over the summer, that low propensity, first time, limited English speaking voters actually worry about vote by mail and don't know if their vote is going to be counted if they vote by mail. And why is that? Because the president and others have spent months attacking the credibility of vote by mail and attacking the integrity of vote by mail. And I just want to be really clear with folks. There is no basis for this. California has made voting by mail available to voters since 2002. It's hugely popular. In some counties, voting by mail is used at 70 or 80%. There is no evidence in California at any point that it led to a meaningful amount of fraud. 5 states, mostly West Coast states actually, use universal vote by mail. None have had any meaningful vote by mail scandals since they made that move. Oregon, since 2000, has sent out 100 million vote by mail ballots. It has been able to document 12 cases of fraud. And not only is there very little evidence of fraud, I mean, an infinitesimal evidence of fraud, there's also no partisan valence. We have sort of like lost track of this in 2020, but study after study has shown that making vote by mail more accessible to voters just increases access to voting without advantaging Democrats or Republicans. And so the fact of the matter is that even for communities that don't necessarily look to the president for guidance or for moral authority or anything, the rhetoric that he's been able to put into the universe about vote by mail being rife with fraud, what he means by that, I think, is that people will use vote by mail and they'll vote twice. Or people who are undocumented folks or folks who don't have the right to vote in one way or another will use vote by mail to cast a ballot. But what communities of color think that means is my vote won't be counted. And so it's very effective at undermining trust in the one voting option that is safest during a pandemic. And as I said before, it's its form of modern vote suppression.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to that is not only the president doing things that make people question our democracy, but also the Postmaster General even sent out a postcard that had misinformation saying that in California, well, not in California, I think it was Colorado, they sent it out in other places, but that you need to request a mail-in ballot, which is confusing because then people think they need to find where to do that. And that's just, an extra step. I think thinking about these extra steps that we create, also creates voter suppression. And something that our league created was a handout that kind of has some information about what you should know for this election and voting during COVID-19. And that's really, in my mind, the best way to, address misinformation is with correct information, right? Something else in California that we can do is actually track your ballot. So I'm going to put in a link into the comments here so that you all can see that information.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump back in, but in those focus groups that we held over the summer with like low propensity voters, limited English speaking voters, first time voters, sharing with them that in California, you can now track your ballot and get text and email updates on your ballot as it comes to you and then on its way back to the elections office and through the counting process, dramatically increase confidence in voting by mail. So I would really recommend folks publicize this thing called ballot tracks. It's available at where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov, or Adena has a local link as well, but ballot tracks is a confidence booster for folks with vote by mail.
And Janae, I'm gonna jump in too on that one on ballot tracks. You know, this I hope I'm not jumping the gun on the questions, but you know, with ballot tracks, you know, one of the battles that we're facing in North Carolina is making sure that people who make mistakes on their ballots, the county boards of elections don't throw them away or don't spoil them, you know, as we call it in our parlance. But you know, making sure that you in tracking your ballot, make sure that it's received and counted. If there's a mistake, you know, I'm not sure what California does as far as a curing method, but making sure that, you know, a simple mistake, the county board doesn't throw your ballot out. Make sure that, you know, you can push for, you know, let me fix my ballot. Instead of throwing it away, let me fix it. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I know some work that I did over the summer, we were tracking the closing of polling locations, and a lot of the reason was because a lot of poll workers are the elderly, and they were afraid to work at these polling locations due to COVID. So this next question, I just want you to tell us how young voters can get involved and what they can do in their community to help mobilize other voters and ensure that our voices are heard. And I know one way that we were looking at was them becoming poll workers, but is there anything else that you could recommend?
Sure, I'd like to start on this one. So, you know, of course, I think it's great to be a poll worker. And I think what a lot of folks don't know is you can actually get paid to be a poll worker. So it's not just you volunteering, you're getting paid, and it's pretty good money too, in California at least. So I definitely recommend that if you're, you know, concerned about our democracy and want to make sure that polling locations are open and accessible, that you check out becoming a poll worker. And of course, you know, I have to give a plug for the League of Women Voters. There are leagues all around the United States. There are about, I think, over 700 leagues, and in California over 50. So there is most likely a local league near you that desperately needs, you know, volunteers who, you know, have skills. Like many of us are law students, you know, we have skills with Zoom even because we have to go to school through Zoom all the time now, that, you know, would be really beneficial to making sure we can get the information out. I also just want to say that, like, in terms of young folks, whatever that means, you know, getting involved, I think giving information to your friends and talking to your friends about voting is also really important. We have so much misinformation through social media, but we can also use social media to push out correct information. So again, you know, checking in and following those trusted sources and making sure you're getting that info out.
I have a couple things that people can get involved with in California. So one, yes, of course, absolutely, volunteer as a poll worker. There's a huge need for poll workers in 2020 because so many folks who have traditionally done it really don't feel comfortable doing it amid a pandemic. But there's other things you can do as well. So, for example, through a nationwide election protection coalition that includes a ton of leading civil rights organizations and democracy organizations across the country, you can sign up to be a poll monitor, where you go to election day, go to the polls on election day, and you actually make sure that voters are not encountering problems or disenfranchisement, and you can escalate problems to attorneys or to the proper authorities. There are other opportunities. If you don't feel comfortable going into voting sites because of the pandemic, you can be a social media monitor, where you monitor your own social media and others to identify voters who are encountering problems and help them solve those problems, or identify misinformation or disinformation and correct it. And then lastly, you can text bank. We have a program where you can text bank tons and tons of folks in all sorts of states, just good, reliable information about how to cast their ballot, not in favor of one politician or in favor of a campaign, just good, reliable information about how to cast their ballot. You can access all of that at protectthevote.net, and you'll find opportunities wherever you happen to live. So again, I'll say protectthevote.net. If you are specifically based in the Bay Area, The organization that leads the poll monitoring work is Asian Law Caucus, a civil rights organization in San Francisco, and I would recommend you seek them out.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback. Sorry, Jeanette, you don't mind me jumping in. I see Dr. Turner just joined us. One thing, Jonathan stole the words out of my mouth, like be a poll monitor. So in North Carolina, SCSJ, operates North Carolina Election Protection Hotline, and so that's something that's valuable. But what the mantra is, like the mantra that I'm living by now is more than a vote. LeBron James has his organization is more than a vote, and that's what I would say. Like it's more than a vote. We want you to vote, but it's more than that. Like we want you to help other people and to serve your community.
Thank you. And yes, Dr. Turner just joined us. So hello, Dr. Turner.
Hello. I'm so sorry I couldn't get.
No worries.
So I apologize.
That's no problem. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yes.
I am going to expand this question. So this is again for everyone. Because I've been having discussions with a lot of friends and family about this as well. So since the last election cycle, there's been a lot of discussion around whether or not we should do away with the Electoral College. Can you explain how a president may be elected despite a discrepancy between the popular vote and the Electoral College votes, and why this should not discourage people from voting?
Well, I'm not sure who you're directing it to.
Oh, anyone. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Turner.
Yes, the Electoral College is obviously something that went into effect with the original, when the country was founded, and it's pretty much outdated. Just so you know that the League of Women Voters has basically a policy that the Electoral College should be abolished. We have not spent a lot of time working on that now, and we are part of the National Popular Vote Compact, which is going on right now, which you may or may not know about. But how basically the Electoral College works is that every state has basically Electoral College counts votes according to how many Congress people they have, which is determined by the census, plus their 2 senators. So you think about it, in states that may, even though they may have a smaller population, they still may have a significant number of Electoral College voters, okay? And because of that, when we finally determine who's going to be president, we don't look at the popular vote. What we use is purely the Electoral College vote. And because of that, there is a discrepancy. And I guess we think about it in the last, 6 or 7 elections? I can't remember for sure. One of you other folks on the panel may remember. The person who has won the presidency has not had the popular vote, has not won the popular vote. And you've seen that even in your lifetime, I'm sure. And so, the pushback you'll hear, just I'll put that out there, then as we discussed, is that people are saying, well, if you live in, say, a state that has a smaller population or a rural area, that then your vote doesn't count as much. And in reality, when we look at it, there's in fact, there really isn't any other election in the country that is decided by a system that's archaic as this. Everywhere else, if you get, if you win the most votes, that's the winner of the election. And we really are at a point where, as we look at where our country is and how the Electoral College is really disenfranchising so many groups of people, that it's probably time to say, okay, we need to seriously look at this. Unfortunately, it will be a struggle and it will require a constitutional amendment change. So that's just one of the pieces. So.
Anyone else, feel free to jump in.
I think Dr. Turner said it all there.
I was going to say.
I said Dr. Turner said it all
No,
there.
she did say it all. I just wanted to make sure everyone.
Yeah, she said it all. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question, which is very important. How will the calls for racial justice and the social justice movements that we've seen during the summer up until now, how will they affect the election, and is it likely to cause higher voter turnout, in your opinion? Again, anyone, feel free to jump in.
I mean, I think so. I think that the calls for racial justice and social justice movements, I think it definitely will increase voter turnout because there's a lot of energy around these issues of white supremacy, these issues of racial injustice. I think it will increase voter turnout. But what I hope it doesn't do, like, there is a potential that it will also cause people to stay at home because they're so done with the system. And they believe the system is not working for them, so they're just going to sit out. They don't like Joe Biden. They definitely don't like President Trump. They don't like the independent party candidate. And so they decide to sit at home because they think their vote doesn't matter, because if they can kill me in the streets, why am I going to care about my elected officials? My life is not valuable to anybody. So why should I go vote? It does nothing for me. And so that's what I'm hoping doesn't happen, but that is, I think, a collateral consequence of this movement as well. But one of the things that I'm doing and trying to do is inspire people and to let's use this energy for good, and not, let's make sure that this movement continues and we don't build a monument here. This is a movement, not a monument. We have to continue to push forward, despite what's happening in our community, despite, the hurt and the pain that we feel. We have to continue to move forward because if we don't do it, then nothing is going to change. And that can't happen. We have to make change.
I think really, Mitchell, you said something very valuable there. One of the things that we get worried about when we start talking about voter suppression or, attitudes toward the candidates and all the things that's happening in our country right now is that we lose sight of the fact that the only way to actually make change is to vote. And I look at it this way, and I don't know if the rest of you agree, and you can certainly jump in on me. But first of all, I come up with the fact that if your vote didn't count, why would they be trying to suppress it? Think about that. So clearly your vote, so there's a reason for that. And two, that the only way you're going to get the people in there that are going to make the changes that you want is that you vote, and then you hold their feet to the fire, and then you elect the people that you want. We have to remember, this is about this, all the hypes around the president, which is critical, obviously, but there are votes being taken at other levels. Your congresspeople, your senators, your mayors, all those other votes count, and you really have a voice in those. So I just keep reminding people that there's more than just voting for a president. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that it is 100% true that this moment in our history really sort of cuts both ways. It will mobilize huge numbers of people. It has really also shown, I think, the deficiencies of our democratic system. It has really illustrated for folks the ways in which all of our answers do not lie in our politicians and our political leaders. And frankly, also, I think it illustrates that our democratic institutions do not work all that well, right? So the last, returning to the Electoral College, 2 of the last 5 times we elected a president, the person who lost the popular vote won the Electoral College, right? The Senate, I think something like a combination of states that have something like 40 votes in the U.S. Senate have the same population as California, which has 2 votes in the U.S. Senate. It really feels like our democratic institutions are not up to the moment. They do not represent us. And so I totally understand why people may be disillusioned and not feel like their answers come through the democratic process. And I guess I'll use a very law school term. Voting is necessary but not sufficient. It is not the answer by itself. It is one piece of a larger answer. We need to vote, and then we need to do all the other things in addition to voting. And so I would say that basically you vote because it is a necessary step, but you cannot pretend like it is all of the answers. And hopefully no one is telling you it's all the answers, right? So if you're super disillusioned, you're like, voting's not going to solve anything. I hope there are people in your life who are saying no one's claiming voting is going to solve everything. It is one step that we need to take among many, many others. And I'll just also emphasize that in California, there are ballot measures that are going to be close votes that bear on the question of racial justice and social justice. There are local DA races and sheriff's races. There are city council races that are going to bear on the question of racial justice, social justice, policing, housing justice, all sorts of key issues that matter to us. And they're going to be close votes. We just need to make sure people realize that voting at the local level matters. just as much. Sometimes maybe it matters more than voting at the national level.
I have to say that when I got involved with the league, it was really at a point in my life where I was like, does my vote matter? I'm not sure. And I think that doing local work and really seeing how getting involved in a local level could make a difference, like I could actually see the difference, really just made me feel hopeful again. And I know I already said this, but I really think that getting involved is so important this year, and it's really one way to feel like you actually have control over what's going on. Like when everyone's telling me, oh, I feel so overwhelmed, like I don't know anything about what's going on with this election, like I kind of give up. I think it's when you're actually doing the work, you really feel like you can actually see the change, and you're kind of more connected, and I think that that's very powerful. So
that message of engagement I find very exciting, and that's what gives me hope when I wake up in the morning, seeing that people are getting engaged. And I think one of the things, as you guys are becoming leaders, and the folks on this call, I'm sure, are going to be leaders in the future, is that whole idea of fostering and pushing civic engagement for everybody coming up behind us is really critical. Because I think Jonathan made a really good point there, that it's not just voting that's going to change things, but it's actually going to be getting engaged, like you said, Adena. So, I say kudos to, and there are all kinds of ways you can get engaged, and you select, your issues and the people you want to engage with. And so vote plus get engaged. So civic engagement is huge.
Yes, it is. I was just thinking about this earlier today. Our criminal justice system and how it impacts felons' voting rights. And I was reading an article, Mayor Bloomberg paid 31 million or something like that in fines for felons in Florida. So I just want to ask this question. Due to racial bias in the criminal justice system, how do felony disenfranchisement laws, like the ones in Florida we've seen, in certain states disproportionately affect Black Americans specifically?
Well, I'll take this one. In my time at SSJ, I'm an Equal Justice Works fellow, and I'm working on a project called the criminalization of the ballot box. And so what the criminalization of the ballot box is, it deals with the disenfranchisement of those who have felony records, but also on the back end, the prosecution of those same individuals if they vote and they haven't finished their sentences yet. And so on the issue of racial justice, it affects Black folks at a higher rate than other races and ethnicities, because our neighborhoods are over criminalized, over policed. In North Carolina, I can speak for North Carolina, we have Black folks that make up 22% of the population, yet we make up 42% of the people that have a felony record. And so you look at those numbers, and it's staggering, the silencing of the Black community that in the state of North Carolina occurs across many states across the country. And if you look at history tells us that that's exactly what's supposed to happen. You look at the period of post-Reconstruction to the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. It was an era of reclamation by white supremacists. You may be free, your body may be free, but I'm going to incarcerate that body now. I'm going to take away your right to vote by putting these petty felonies against you, or these crimes of moral turpitude, as it's called in Alabama. I'm going to charge you with these crimes so that you can't vote. And so you may be free in terms of your physical freedom, unless you're incarcerated, but also I'm gonna make you die a civil death, where you can't vote anymore. You can't serve on a jury. You can't run for office, so your voice is silenced. And if you look at how that plays out today, it's the same story. If you have a felony record, you can't vote. If you're still serving a felony sentence, you can't vote. What does serving a felony sentence mean? Janae, you talked about former Mayor Bloomberg, paying off the fines and fees for those in Florida. I'm so glad he did that. I'm so glad LeBron James is doing that. I'm so glad that other folks are doing that, because the right to vote should never be conditioned on somebody's ability to pay. You look at it, it's a nasty cycle that is created when a person has a felony record. They can't vote because they can't pay their fines and fees, but also because they have a felony record, they can't find a job. So how do you expect them to pay back the fines and fees? And in my project in particular, now you're looking at, prosecution. Oh, if you vote because you made a mistake because you thought you were eligible, now it's a separate felony offense that you can be charged with. And that's what we're fighting against. And, I can say it now, but SCSJ, we filed a case yesterday against the North Carolina voter prosecution statute, challenging its constitutionality because it's a strict liability offense in North Carolina if you have a felony record and you vote, even if you made a mistake. Like, you don't have to have any intent to defraud the state of North Carolina. And because you have a felony record and you have not finished your sentence, meaning you haven't paid your fines and fees, you can be charged with a separate felony and 2 years in prison. And that is terrible. And if you look, and we can tie that directly to 1900 amendment that was passed with the explicit purpose of disenfranchising Black voters. Like, it's explicitly like, we're going to charge all these Black people with felony records so they can never vote again. And that needs to stop, and that's why we're fighting back against it.
And do you see those fees and tax, folks who have, they've given their time, even though their time may not have been justified. But once they walk out the door, it's like basically a poll tax. And that's really what it comes down to, because there are, in fact, people today look at our justice system and say, we're running debtors' prisons. In other words, that if you're in there long enough, you start, think about how much they charge you to make a phone call when you're in, and so these fees are piling up and they are unjustified too. So that's another piece of it that is just really frustrating, but truly it's just like a poll tax. That's all it is to it, so.
I think we should talk about Prop 17 in California, but Adena, do you want to jump in on that, or should I?
No, please go ahead.
Right. So we're tackling this problem in California, and I'm ashamed to say that California actually is behind a lot of states on this matter, even though we have relatively we have voting laws that are meant to be inclusive and accessible, and yet we need Prop 17 to make the vote accessible to folks who've completed their term in state prison. So in California, the way that our felony disenfranchisement laws work is that, like in most states, your right to vote is not impacted by a misdemeanor conviction, is not impacted if you're in jail or on probation following a term in jail, but your right to vote is taken away while you're in a state prison and while you're on a term of state parole. And so there's multiple kinds of community supervision after you finish a term of incarceration, but there's only one, state parole, that means you lose your voting rights. And for some in California, because of the legacy of the tough on crime era and the war on drugs, you can be on parole for the rest of your life finishing a term in prison, which means you never get your right to vote back. In California, if Prop 17 passes, it will mean that the day you leave prison, you have your right to vote back. You just need to re-register to get it. So you will be able to vote while on parole. So that's an effort being led by the ACLU, Legal Services for Prisoners and Children, and a number of other community organizations. And Returning Citizens, I'm proud to say, are leading that effort in many ways, are the leading spokespeople for that effort. And I'm happy to say that California Common Cause is in support of Prop 17.
Fantastic.
League of Women Voters as well. So yeah, definitely. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's really such a shame. And I think that I'm glad you also highlighted the piece of the fact that, like, if you have a misdemeanor or you're in jail, you can still vote, because that is really confusing for a lot of folks. They just think, oh, okay, because I'm incarcerated, or I've been incarcerated, I just can't vote anymore. And can you imagine? I mean, I think for me, what I have a hard time with is just the fact that their vote gets taken away even when they're incarcerated. And also, I think the fact that we have to register to vote in itself, if you think about it, is a little crazy, because, shouldn't we already be in the system? Why do we need to do that? It's just an extra step, something that I kind of struggle with. And I think that we just accept, oh, this is just a part of voting, instead of thinking about, let's change the system and look at what's not working.
And Janae, you don't mind me jumping in real quick. So something Dr. Turner said, I think is really important, is that, having a person pay fines and fees in order to have the right to vote restored is a poll tax. And I encourage everyone to look at the 11th Circuit en banc case that came out of Florida in which the 11th Circuit said that if you have a felony record, you basically don't have any rights. You no longer have the fundamental right to vote. And that was the dispositive language about why this having paid your fines and fees is not a poll tax. It's because a person with a felony record does not have civil rights, and they lost their fundamental right to vote. And that is emblematic of the way we treat people with felony records in this country. Like, once you have a felony record, it sticks with you for the rest of your life, and you are now a second-class citizen according to many of the societal norms. And we have to fix that. We have to stop treating these people like they can be thrown away. They are people. They are people. They may have made a mistake, and as the President Obama said a couple of years ago, but for the grace of God, there go I. So we cannot sit on our high horses as a society and think that these people with felony records are not people and are not deserving of the opportunity to let their voices be heard. And so when the court says that in a court filing, in his ruling, that a person with felony record does not have any civil rights, it angers me, and it again pushes me to continue to do this work. So I'll leave it there. I get really passionate about this.
I'm still worked up about this. Can I add to this? I know we have a...
No, go ahead.
Part of the problem in Florida is that the court system can't reliably tell people how much they owe in fees and fines. And so there's all these, Bloomberg is making this massive donation and other people. My parents, for crying out loud, I never thought my parents would ever do this, but I convinced them this week to donate to the FRRC, right? Florida Rights Restoration Project Coalition, maybe. Anyway, point is, a bunch of the money is there, and yet these folks can't, the system is so screwed up that it can't even tell them what they owe. And so people are like, listen, I have the money. I'm ready to do whatever I have to do to get my voting rights back. And the same system that told them you need to pay all your fees and fines before you get the right to vote is also telling them we can't tell you what your fees and fines actually are, right? So this idea that we are going to entangle people forever in these government systems that do not actually work, right, and take away their most fundamental right in the process, it's just outrageous. And anyway, I my heart goes out to everybody in Florida who is trying to do everything they possibly can, right? And yet the system will not let them live.
Yes, thank you for that. I equally feel fired up about it, and I'm happy former Mayor Bloomberg is paying off a significant chunk of these fines. And I think it was Jonathan, you mentioned Prop 17 on the ballot in California. I have a question from the audience in terms of, this is specific to California. What are good resources for understanding state and local propositions that you can offer or suggest? Anyone actually can answer this as well.
Yeah, I think that Dora actually put in the chat, and I put a whole chunk of resources too. Yeah, just copy paste it, folks. There's like a lot of information there, I know. But one of them is votersedge.org, specific to California. You your address, and it tells you everything that's going to be on your ballot, which is amazing. It gives you the pros and cons, which organizations support and oppose, who's paying for it, all those important things. If you're living in other states, vote411.org is another great resource. And then the Easy Voter Guide for California as well. It comes in multiple different languages. So that will give you, again, pros and cons, information about it, how to vote this election.
And I think it's real critical for, you haven't given that information, that for everybody listening to take that information and then share it with their friends and with their families, and that these are the places where you can get the information, because it doesn't do any good for us who are engaged right in it to have that information if we're not spreading it out. So I think it's really critical. I think it was, I don't know if it was Mr. or Jonathan that made the comment about, when, not just you voting, but reaching out to others to vote. And, we used to have a saying way back in the day, way back, and a few years ago, I'd say about 30 years ago, when I was doing some voter stuff, party related, so it's like, go to vote and take a friend, so nowadays it should be go vote and take 20 friends, but that should be the really process here, because we have to reach a lot of people. So anyway.
Can I build on that for just 1 second? So to Deborah's point about educating your community, I mean, it's so important always, but it's particularly important in 2020. So if you're a California voter, lots of things are different, right? So some counties are going to be offering standard polling places where you just vote at that, the schoolhouse or the fire station around the corner from your house, and voting's only available on election day. Other counties are going to be offering what are called vote centers, where you can vote. There's a smaller number of larger sites, and they're open for a 4-day early vote period. And you can go to any one in the county. So you can go to the one that's closest to your work or closest to the grocery store or closest to whatever, and they will give you the ballot that is specific to you no matter where you live. But that differs by county. So you need to know exactly what the in-person voting is like in your county, right? Can you go anywhere? Do you have to go to one specific place? Can you vote early, or do you have to vote on election day? There's just more you need to know about voting in 2020. I've said this to people, and I think it actually discourages folks, and I'm sorry, but like voting in 2020 involves more homework than any previous election. You just need to do more to be prepared. You need to make a plan to vote. And you need to walk, after you've done all that, you need to walk your family, your friends, and your community members through that same process.
Yep. And I think that's what I find, that with people that I know who are like, oh, my vote doesn't count, so it doesn't matter. And that it takes enough time already to get to vote. In this election, it's going to be even more time and effort. I find it, I just want to know like how you encourage those people. Like, what do you tell them? I think a lot of them are discouraged, at least the ones that I'm talking to. And I just want to find ways to like get them out there and get them to see that their vote matters and their voice counts. So just any last, closing remarks on how we can inspire those who feel so deflated that they need to go out and vote.
I mean, if you don't mind me starting, I would say, that you have to look at history. You have to look at history and see the hundreds of elections that were decided by a small number of votes. I think Michelle Obama, I saw a quote the other day, Michelle Obama said that if 5 more people voted in every precinct, then we'd have a different outcome, from the 2016 election. Just 5 people. And I'm from Virginia, and my congressman in Virginia, he lost, and the first time he ran, he lost by 1 vote. He literally lost by 1 vote. If 1 person or 2 people would have voted, he would have won. There was some, I would call it voter suppression around it, because 80 ballots, 80 people that voted in some from Fredericksburg, Virginia, 80 people that voted in that election received the wrong ballot. 80 people received the wrong ballot, and he lost by 1 vote. Like you look at this, and you should tell people, like, look, this is what happened. Like, this is what's happening out there. Your vote doesn't matter. And then lastly, what I would say is, imagine you saying, that you're not going to vote, and then you have your circle of influence, which is, other people that, they see you not voting, so they themselves are not going to vote. And now you have this spread of I'm not going to vote, and 1 person has turned into thousands of people not voting. And that's where we have to stop the spread. Just like we have to stop the spread of COVID, and not to make light of COVID, we got to stop the spread of COVID. We have to stop the spread of this virus that my vote don't count. Like, we have to stop that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any other closing remarks?
I've been telling this story a lot recently because, like I said, I always say, it really impacted me a lot. But I live in South Berkeley, and I was on the bus one day, and I was chatting with this Black woman who was sitting next to me. She had her I voted sticker on, and we were chatting about how we had voted and all that. And she said to me, of course I voted. My ancestors died for my right to vote. And that really made an impact on me. And I think about that a lot when I'm voting, because it's true. I mean, as an Asian American woman, the 9th Amendment didn't do it for me. I wouldn't have been voting back then. And, there's been a lot of work and blood and sweat and tears that went into getting women the right to vote. And as a woman of color, I especially feel like it's my duty. So
I'll just say, I'll just speak to the non-Black attendees you have here today. I've been asked multiple times, has voting ever been harder? How could it be any worse? What hope are we supposed to find in this moment? And the fact of the matter is, the Black folks in America have had their vote denied for hundreds of years and have persevered. And if Black folks have been able to do it, you can do it too. I'm just saying, I'm sorry. But like, the fact of the matter is that Black Americans have dealt with worse for longer. And if they've been able to, and now if you look at voting rates in California and elsewhere, Black folks are voting at rates that are close to white folks, but certainly higher than Asian American folks and Latino folks. And if Black Americans have found a way to fight through all the voter suppression that they've faced over decades and hundreds of years, you and me, we can do it too, I promise.
And I guess I'd just like to add that last piece. Everything you guys have said is just right on target, and I love it. I'm inspired. You guys are getting me excited, okay, again, about all of this. I absolutely am enjoying this. And I just want also to think about voting is about the future. You know, we talk about here and in the moment, but, you know, like as Adena said, she thinks about the folks who came before, who died to get the right to vote, you know, and all the people who struggled, like, you know, Jonathan just said, and, you know, the comments that Misha made that were shot me through the heart there. But what we do today and how we vote today is going to make a difference for the future of this country. And let's make it personal. It's going to be the future, not only your future, but if you have a family, if you're going to have children, or whatever your, you know, sites are going to be in the future. Voting is about the future. And if you really want a good future for your family and for those to come after you, it is almost, I believe, your duty to vote.
Yep, Jonathan, I'm definitely going to use that line or that line of thinking and tell it's my family members that I have who aren't voting, and I just need to get them out there, get them registered. We do have a couple more minutes. If any audience questions, you can just post them in the chat and I can read them. Otherwise, make sure that you have the information that I know Adena's been posting in the chat. Make sure you register to vote. Make sure you come up with a plan, because COVID again is adding this additional hurdle. So if you're going to vote in person, make sure you're doing it safely. If you're going to vote by mail, make sure you're ready. But other than that, I know it is Friday evening, so I want to respect everyone's time and just thank our panelists again for being here tonight, and thank everyone else who's and the audience for being here tonight. Yeah, and I just, any last words before we depart?
I'm sorry, Jenny, can I make a quick?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so this event is recorded and we are going to post it to our Facebook page. And if anybody has, I just felt like there was, all of their comments were very insightful. So if you want to share the video off of BLSA's Facebook page, I just felt like this was very informative. And there's also all of the links that were posted in the chat should also be available there as well. So I just want to make sure that we spread the word.
Yes, that is good to know. So when people say they're not going to vote, I'm just going to play them this recording and have Jonathan scream in their ear and tell them this is why you should be voting. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you for our panelists. We'll stay on for a little bit, just in case you haven't gotten the information in the chat. But yes, happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend and go vote. Make sure you're registered.
And thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, bye.
Last thing for those of you who are here, ballots are going to start getting mailed out in California October 5th. So just want to throw that out.
I did mean to say that,
yeah. Voting right away. So as soon as you get your ballots.